When Anna buys the old apartment, she knows it is cheap for a reason. The building smells of dust and time, the walls are uneven, the pipes make strange noises at night, and the previous owner left in a hurry without taking most of the furniture. And at first, Anna feels lucky, because after years of renting small rooms and moving every few months, this place finally feels like something stable, something that belongs to her. And during the first days, she cleans slowly, opening drawers, throwing away old magazines, broken dishes, yellowed papers, and she treats everything like meaningless leftovers from someone else's life. Until one evening, she tries to move a heavy wardrobe in the bedroom and notices that the back panel sounds hollow. And when she presses on it, part of the wood shifts slightly, revealing a narrow hidden space inside the wall. And at first, she thinks it is just bad construction, but curiosity pushes her to look deeper, and using her phone light, she sees a small metal box hidden behind the panel, covered in dust and sealed with old tape. And her first reaction is not excitement, but discomfort, because this is not something builders forget. This is something someone deliberately hid. And sitting on the floor in the half-dark room, she holds the box in her hands, feeling the weight of it, wondering how long it has been there, how many people lived in this apartment without knowing about it, and whether the person who hid it ever intended someone to find it. And when she finally opens it, she finds not money or valuables, but dozens of printed photos, letters, and handwritten notes, all dated from the same year, all focused on one person, a woman whose face appears again and again in different places, cafes, streets, public transport. And Anna slowly realizes she is holding a private archive of someone's life, a story that was never meant to be preserved. And the most disturbing part is not the existence of the box, but the feeling that this unknown woman was being watched, documented, remembered in detail by someone who never wanted to be known. And as Anna sits alone in her new apartment, surrounded by someone else's secret, she understands that buying this home also means inheriting a mystery she cannot easily ignore. That night, Anna cannot sleep, even though she keeps telling herself that it is probably nothing serious, just some weird old memorabilia, maybe a private project, maybe someone's obsession that never turned into anything dangerous. But the images from the box keep returning to her mind, the same woman appearing in different photos, sometimes smiling, sometimes unaware, sometimes clearly not posing. And the more Anna thinks about it, the more uncomfortable she feels, because these are not memories, they are surveillance. And lying in bed, she starts wondering who took these pictures, why they were kept, and why they were hidden inside a wall instead of thrown away. And she imagines the previous owner standing in the same room, carefully placing the box, sealing it, making sure no one would ever find it. And she realizes how little she knows about the people who lived here before her, how easily lives disappear without leaving visible traces, and how strange it is that she is now the only person who knows this secret exists. And she considers calling the real estate agency, asking about the history of the apartment, but immediately feels stupid for even thinking about it, because how do you explain something like this without sounding paranoid? And as the hours pass and the city outside grows quiet, Anna understands that the box has already changed how she feels about the place. But was supposed to be a fresh start now feels contaminated by someone else's unresolved story. And the most disturbing thought is not what she found, but what she might still find if she keeps looking. The next day, Anna takes the box with her to work, even though she tells herself she is only doing it so she can look through the contents more carefully in better light. But deep down, she knows she is afraid to leave it alone in the apartment, as if the object itself carries some kind of presence. And during her lunch break, she sits in a quiet corner of a cafe, slowly spreading the photos and letters across the table, trying to organize them in chronological order. And the more she studies them, the more disturbing the pattern becomes, because the woman in the pictures appears to live an ordinary life, going to work, meeting friends, shopping, using public transport, and yet someone followed her for months, documenting routines, locations, habits, writing notes about what time she left home, what cafe she preferred, who she spoke to. And Anna feels a growing discomfort as she realizes how detailed and systematic it all is, how this is not random curiosity, but long-term observation, and she starts asking herself questions that feel too heavy for a normal day, like whether the woman ever knew she was being watched, whether something eventually happened to her, whether this story ended peacefully or violently. And she notices that some letters stop abruptly, no explanation, no closure, just silence. And this absence feels louder than any explicit ending. And sitting there among people laughing, working, living normal lives, Anna feels completely disconnected from the present because she is mentally inside someone else's past, a past that never received resolution. And she understands that she is now emotionally involved in a story that is not hers, that she cannot simply return the box to the wall and pretend she never found it. Because once you see something like this, once you realize how easily someone's life can be reduced to hidden documents and forgotten rooms, you cannot unknow it. And she feels the uncomfortable truth settle inside her that curiosity is no longer the reason she keeps reading. Responsibility is. That evening, Anna decides to visit the local archive and library, telling herself that she is only looking for context, for dates, addresses, names that appear in the notes. But in reality, she is hoping for something more concrete, some proof that this story has an ending that does not involve disappearance. And she spends hours searching through old newspapers, public records, missing persons databases, trying different combinations of names she found in the letters. And at first, everything feels pointless, until she notices a short article from the same year as the last photo, a small piece buried deep in the local news section about a woman who suddenly moved away after reporting that she felt she was being followed. And there are no details, no investigation, just a brief mention that the case was closed due to lack of evidence, and Anna feels a cold sensation in her stomach, because the name matches one of the signatures from the box, and she realizes that what she is holding is not just a private obsession, it is connected to a real fear someone once had, a fear that was officially dismissed and forgotten. And she imagines the woman trying to explain to friends, to police, to family that something felt wrong, that someone was watching her, collecting pieces of her life, and being met with doubt, with polite skepticism, with the assumption that she was exaggerating. And Anna suddenly understands how easily reality can be erased when it does not fit institutional logic, how stories disappear not because they are false, but because they are inconvenient. And as she leaves the library with tired eyes and a racing mind, she realizes that she is now holding evidence of something that never received recognition. And the question is no longer whether the box is important, but whether she has the right to decide what happens to this forgotten story. Late that night, Anna returns to the apartment, and for the first time since moving in, she does not feel like it belongs to her anymore. Because every corner now feels layered with invisible history, with things that happened without witnesses. And she sits on the floor with the box open again, rereading the letters more carefully, noticing how the tone changes over time, how the early notes are observational and distant, describing routines and locations, but later ones become emotional, almost desperate, full of questions, speculations, imagined conversations. And she realizes that whoever wrote them was not just watching, they were emotionally invested, constructing an entire inner world around someone who did not know they existed. And this realization feels more disturbing than any crime, because it shows how obsession can grow silently, privately, without leaving visible signs. And she starts wondering how many similar stories exist, hidden in apartments, devices, archives, never discovered, never confronted. And she feels a strange sense of responsibility, as if by finding this box, she has become part of a chain that should not end in silence again. And she considers practical options, going to the police, contacting journalists, posting online. But each option feels risky, because she cannot prove anything illegal happened, only that something deeply wrong existed. And she understands how systems require clear evidence, clear victims, clear conclusions, while real life often exists in gray zones where harm is emotional, psychological, invisible. And sitting there in the quiet apartment, she feels the weight of an uncomfortable truth that sometimes the most unsettling stories are not about violence or tragedy, but about how easily a person's fear, experience in reality can be documented, archived, and then forgotten without consequences. And she realizes that the box is not just a mystery, it is a reminder of how fragile privacy and personal safety really are, and how thin the line is between normal life and being someone else's secret. The next morning, Anna finally decides to speak to the neighbor who has lived in the building the longest, an older woman who seems to know everyone and everything that ever happened there. And at first, the conversation feels harmless, just casual questions about previous tenants, renovations, who lived in the apartment before. But when Anna carefully mentions finding some old personal materials hidden in the wall, the neighbor's expression changes slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough for Anna to notice. And she hesitates before answering, saying that years ago, a young woman lived there alone, very quiet, very private, and that one day she suddenly moved out without telling anyone, leaving most of her things behind. And some people thought she had personal problems. Others said she felt unsafe, but no one ever knew the real reason. And listening to this, Anna feels the last pieces align, because this confirms that the woman in the photos was real, not just a name in documents. And she realizes that the story never had an official ending, it simply dissolved into rumors and silence. And she asks whether anyone remembers a man visiting her, anyone suspicious, but the neighbor shakes her head, saying that nothing obvious ever happened, which feels even more disturbing because it means the watcher remained invisible, unremarkable, undetected. And as Anna walks back to her apartment, she understands that the most frightening part is not the mystery itself, but how easily a person can disappear from collective memory without triggering any real investigation, how society accepts unresolved stories as normal. And she feels a growing discomfort with the idea of doing nothing, of becoming just another silent observer in a chain of people who know something is wrong but choose not to act. And she starts to realize that the real decision is no longer about curiosity, it is about whether she is willing to break that pattern of quiet forgetting. The next morning, Anna finally decides to speak to the neighbor who has lived in the building the longest, an older woman who seems to know everyone and everything that ever happened there. And at first, the conversation feels harmless, just casual questions about previous tenants, renovations, who lived in the apartment before. But when Anna carefully mentions finding some old personal materials hidden in the wall, the neighbor's expression changes slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough for Anna to notice. And she hesitates before answering, saying that years ago, a young woman lived there alone, very quiet, very private, and that one day she suddenly moved out without telling anyone, leaving most of her things behind. And some people thought she had personal problems. Others said she felt unsafe, but no one ever knew the real reason. And listening to this, Anna feels the last pieces align, because this confirms that the woman in the photos was real, not just a name in documents. And she realizes that the story never had an official ending, it simply dissolved into rumors and silence. And she asks whether anyone remembers a man visiting her, anyone suspicious, but the neighbor shakes her head, saying that nothing obvious ever happened, which feels even more disturbing because it means the watcher remained invisible, unremarkable, undetected. And as Anna walks back to her apartment, she understands that the most frightening part is not the mystery itself, but how easily a person can disappear from collective memory without triggering any real investigation, how society accepts unresolved stories as normal. And she feels a growing discomfort with the idea of doing nothing, of becoming just another silent observer in a chain of people who know something is wrong but choose not to act.
and she starts to realize that the real decision is no longer about curiosity. It is about whether she is willing to break that pattern of quiet forgetting.
That night, Anna sits alone in her apartment again. The box now returned from the police with a small receipt and no real outcome, and she places it on the table in front of her, feeling how strange it is that something so heavy emotionally can be treated as something so light institutionally. And she opens it one last time, slowly going through the photos and letters with a different mindset, no longer searching for answers, but trying to understand what this story represents. And she realizes that what disturbs her most is not the unknown watcher, but the unknown woman. The fact that her fear was real, documented, visible, and yet never validated, never resolved. And she imagines her trying to live normally while feeling observed, doubting her own instincts, wondering whether she was paranoid or actually in danger. And she recognizes that experience because it reflects something universal: how often people, especially women, are taught to minimize discomfort, to rationalize unease, to accept anxiety as normal rather than a warning. And she understands that the box is not just about one individual story, it is about a pattern, about how personal boundaries are violated quietly, how emotional safety is treated as secondary, how invisible harm leaves no official trace. And sitting there, she feels a shift inside herself, a kind of quiet responsibility not to solve the mystery, but to refuse its erasure. And she decides that even if the system does nothing, even if the story remains unresolved, she will not allow it to disappear again. And she starts scanning the documents, preserving them digitally, creating a record that cannot be hidden in walls or forgotten in drawers, not to expose anyone, not to accuse, but to acknowledge that this life existed, that this fear was real, that this experience deserves to be seen. And for the first time since moving in, she feels that the apartment is slowly becoming hers again, not because the mystery is gone, but because she has chosen to confront it instead of inheriting silence. Months later, Anna walks through the same apartment, but it no longer feels like a чужие простя filled with чужие тени. It feels lived in again, not because the mystery was solved, but because it was accepted, processed, and transformed into something meaningful. And she realizes how much this story quietly changed her, how it shifted her perception of privacy, safety, memory, and responsibility. And she understands that what started as curiosity became something deeper, a confrontation with how easily people and their experiences can disappear without leaving impact. And she reflects on how the woman from the photos never received justice, never got closure, never became a headline or a case, but her story still altered at least one life, Anna's. And that feels important in a way institutions never measure. And she thinks about how modern life is full of hidden narratives, buried under renovations, archived in devices, locked inside people who never speak about what they experienced. And she understands that most mysteries are not meant to be solved, they are meant to be acknowledged. And this realization feels heavier, but also more honest, because it removes the illusion that truth always leads to resolution, and instead replaces it with the idea that meaning comes from attention, from refusal to ignore, from choosing not to forget. And standing in her room, she looks at the empty wall where the box once was, and feels a quiet sense of closure. Not for the woman, not for the watcher, but for herself. Because she no longer sees the apartment as prosto житло, but as a place that now holds both her life and someone else's forgotten fear. And she accepts that some stories do not end with answers, they end with witnesses. And sometimes being a witness is the only form of justice reality allows.